Welcome to the B Block Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Scott, and I appreciate you for joining me. If you are a Texans fan, it is a great day to be a Texans fan. It is a great day to root for or to watch football in Houston after the Texans beat the Chicago Bears 19-13 on Sunday Night Football. We are coming to you on a late Monday morning, later into the Monday morning, closer to the afternoon when I'm recording this, but it is a reaction Monday and a reaction to what the Texans actually did. And not just that, but what overall the implications were of the NFL Sunday and what I mentioned here and what I mean by this, it being a great day. I don't think we can overstate the importance of the outcome of these first couple of weeks. I think we can dissect and we will, no matter how much negative we might talk about throughout the week, throughout the day, throughout the week, what the Texans need to be better at, what they need to clean up. The fact of the matter is, the Texans could not have asked for a better start to the season after week 2. I think there is no disputing it, no doubt about it. They start the season 2-0 with the wins over the Colts, win over the Bears, and around the division, the AFC South at large, the rest of it is 0-2. Colts 0-2, thanks to the Texans in part. Jags 0-2, and the Titans as well 0-2. So they could not have asked for a better start to the season. So I don't care what your gripe is. We can get to all of them. The offensive line and its pass protection. In this particular game, their inability to establish the run game. And also perhaps being worried about the health of Joe Mixon going forward after that hip drop tackle resulted in some sort of ankle injury, and we'll find out how limited he will be going forward. We expect. I know he returned in the game, came back in the game, but that was a pretty rough tackle, and you got to figure that he's going to be somewhat limited at some point. But with all of that, no matter what your complaint is, and you might even have complaints about the defense from the first week and the explosive plays that they gave up to Anthony Richardson and the Indianapolis Colts. You can have the penalties, right? Them shooting themselves in the foot the way that they have in these first couple of games. You can have all the gripes that you want with the way the Texans have won these games, with the way overall that they have played, and even make the point that they can't continue to play this way if they want to actually compete with the AFC powers, if they actually want to realize these expectations of competing for a Super Bowl or being in the mix for the AFC Championship at the very least. Like, they can't play like this continuously and expect to be in that sort of situation, even at 2-0, even looking like perhaps one of the better teams in the league already. But you could not have asked for a better outcome, and I think you have to live with that. You have to acknowledge that even as you break all of these things down. Now, here's what I would say about the difference between the Texans' wins in week 1 and week 2. In week 1, they were, and we've learned this, I think, more on this through 2 weeks of the season. In week 1, it looks like the Texans' offensive line was able to take advantage of an Indianapolis Colts defense, a defensive front and a defense at large that is not as good against the run as we were expecting it to be, and perhaps is bad against the run. I think that's what we learned, because the Texans were able to run it all over them, and then the Green Bay Packers were able to do the same on Sunday. And so that is what the Texans were able to do. The reason why they were able to dominate that game, dominate up front, because they were able to take advantage of a mismatch up front or a hole within the team. And we know that football is all about the matchups, all about trying to exploit the matchup discrepancies. And it's clear that the one that the Texans exploited in week 1 was the fact that the Indianapolis Colts are, at least through 2 weeks, appear to be weak up front defensively. On the flip side, it seems that in this Bears game, what allowed them to win the game, other than, and we'll get to this in a moment, some otherworldly performances and moments from Nico Collins once again. But I would say the difference in this game was that they were able to take advantage of a bad offensive line in the Bears, right? The fact that they were able to get to Caleb Williams as much as they were able to. You can go back and look at the game, go back and look at the photos from the game. They are all over Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is running for his life. I think the fact that they were able to identify the weakness in the Bears, and that is clearly their offensive line, and that's what they're talking about in Chicago right now. All Bears fans will co-sign this. That offensive line is a flat-out problem. I think they're, despite Caleb Williams not being remarkable per se to start his NFL career, I think they're still hopeful and optimistic about Caleb Williams. But what's around him in terms of the offensive line is the big issue with the Bears, and the Texans were able to exploit that. So poor offensive line for the Bears, advantage Texans with their defensive line. Poor defensive line for the Indianapolis Colts, advantage Texans with their offensive line, at least in the run game, particularly in the run game. So that's been essentially the difference, exploiting the matchup discrepancies and the weaknesses of the opponent. I think also something that has definitely benefited the Texans, and I was mentioning this with somebody earlier in the day, but they've been able to take advantage of the fact that they were playing against inexperienced quarterbacks. You know, I think I even made the point on Twitter/X that, hey, while the defense is like, one of the big takeaways from the first couple of weeks is that the defense looks pretty good. Like, I know they gave up some explosives against the Colts, but overall, I think you've got to feel pretty good about the defense. Like, they got to Anthony Richardson a time or two in that opener. And I think I specifically point out the Mario Edwards sack where Will Anderson Jr., oh my God, like he should get some sort of credit for the way he absorbed a double team and was a problem even within the double team, which left Mario Edwards essentially unblocked and able to run around that traffic and get to Anthony Richardson last week. But the point being there is the defense, for me at least, the impression is the defense is ready to compete, even though they gave up some explosives to the Colts. But the thing that's benefited them and that I can't ignore or pretend is not important is that they were going up against inexperienced quarterbacks and were able to exploit said inexperienced quarterbacks. So that's helped them quite a bit. I think that's been, so I kind of went over that, the difference between the wins and then the commonality between the wins, which is, hey, these inexperienced quarterbacks were not ready to go up against a defense quite of this caliber. And in the case of the first game, I think it was also more so that they were able to establish the run. They were able to run the ball, keep the defense off the field for the most part. So you got to feel good. You got to feel good if you are a Texans fan. I don't know any other way to really view it, even though you've got these, these issues that you might want to pick apart. And I think that's the sign of a team that is ready to compete, that is ready to be for real. When you can pick apart wins, you can win the game and be like, hey, but you had all these penalties. Hey, but you gave up all these explosives, or whatever the case may be. Now, I would say that even though I'll give the Chicago Bears defense, that's a for real defense. Like, that is a legitimate defense. If they can figure out anything offensively, find a way to get Caleb Williams into a rhythm, into some kind of flow, the Bears might actually have a chance because their defense is going to give them a chance. But just defensively, or no, excuse me. For the Texans, the thing that bothered me and that I'm still trying to figure out exactly what's going on, why couldn't they establish the run at all in this game? Like, to me, that is, and then this was a conversation point for a lot of media and a lot of people talking throughout the game. It's like, okay, well, now that we know that the Colts have a leaky run defense, a not so good run defense, how much can we really credit the Texans for what they did in week 1? Even though we think Joe Mixon and believe Joe Mixon is actually good, how good are they as a whole between Joe Mixon and the offensive line if this is the difference between what they put up against a Colts defense that, again, is leaky up front in terms of defending the run, and a Bears defense that looks like it's legit on all three levels. Like the Bears have, I think, high-level players on all three, from the defensive line, a linebacker, into the secondary. I think they got high-level players all around, even though I think Tyreek Stevenson poked the bear, like kind of literal. That is a saying or euphemism possibly, but also kind of almost literal, because he tried to poke Nico Collins through his face mask. And then, Collins obviously gets a penalty for retaliating, but then promptly dusts old boy, who again hit him in the face and was called for it this time. But it didn't matter because Nico Collins made it happen. Made it happen. So, but yeah, the Russian attack is the concern coming out of the game, because it's like, all right, we thought that based off of how they won that first game, that hey, they opened up a new portal. Like, there's a whole new element to this offense now. They can lean on their offensive line and the brute strength of the running back that they brought in, and Joe Mixon. And hey, you got something that you're working with. Now, after week 2, you're not exactly sure about that, because Juice Scruggs, your starting center, did not play. Your offensive line did not look as good in establishing that physicality that they did against the Colts. And then, of course, Joe Mixon, on top of that, was hip drop tackled and could be limited or out possibly. We'll see how that develops throughout the week. But those are the developments of the game, or from the game, even in a victory, that would be concerning going forward. And okay, let's not forget the fact that they got the Minnesota Vikings coming up. And how about them being basically one of the surprises of the NFL season so far after 2 weeks? Like, I don't think anybody is surprised to see the Texans be 2-0 after 2 weeks with all of the hype that was around them. But their opponent in week 3, I think, the Minnesota Vikings, and what they've been able to pull off, they along with the New Orleans Saints, who blew out the Cowboys, after blowing out the Panthers in week 1, they blow out the Cowboys. I think they got the best point differential in football right now, because they're blowing the teams out. They're the first 2 opponents out. And then the Vikings, you can shrug your shoulders at them beating the Giants, but when they handle up on the 49ers and they impose a certain level of strength and physicality on the 49ers and make them look pedestrian, that's something that I don't think you can sneeze at. All right. And you don't have to fall for any kind of Sam Darnold banana in the tailpipe to recognize that he's playing pretty good football right now. He's in a pretty good situation. We'll see what's up with the Justin Jefferson injury, but he's in a good situation with Kevin O'Connell and what's around him. They've been able to establish the run as well. And that looks like a legitimate squad that the Texans are facing in week 3. So to me, that makes it even all the more critical that they won these first couple of games against opponents that they're supposed to beat. Their division rivals, one of them lost to them, but also overall have lost their first 2 games. And then you're going into week 3 against so far your most formidable opponent, your most worthwhile opponent. And I think going into the season, we would have said that through the first 3 weeks that Indianapolis was probably the best team that they would play. I think after 2 weeks, going into week 3, we probably feel like the Vikings are the best team that they've played so far. So to me, they're coming up with their biggest test yet against the Vikings, against a team in the Vikings that just beat, I think, what a lot of people believe is What a lot of people believe. What am I saying? The 49ers just went to the Super Bowl and they have basically the same team. So yeah, this is legitimate. This matchup against the Vikings. Another thing I definitely want to point out from this game, and no, not just from this game, actually, I want to point this out from just the first 2 weeks and something that I think we'll be able to talk about for the entire season and possibly for the entire time that these guys play together. The CJ Stroud, Nico Collins connection is a lethal one. It is for real. We've seen it in the first couple of weeks. We saw it quite a bit last year. Obviously, Nico Collins did enough to earn himself a contract extension, which through the first 2 weeks, and I think possibly by the end of the season here, is going to look like a bargain, like a steal. I thought that it was not for sure necessary to do that deal at that time, but I definitely am going to eat crow on that. Like Nico Collins is probably worth, like he is probably worth more than the buck that he got over the offseason. You take that bird in hand. I don't blame him for signing that contract one bit because it's life changing. But man, it definitely looks like they got a bargain on that. But my point being here about this lethal connection between CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. We talked a lot last week about the run game being like this revelation or something that they can rely on. And I'll be damned if it haven't actually been Nico Collins, and specifically in this game, but we've seen it now. Somebody that if he's out there, if he's healthy, that is somebody that they can rely on to carry them, to essentially be their offense. And that's what Nico Collins was. Like he has through 2 weeks established himself. I know this was a debate. This was a topic. Who is the number one wide receiver on this team? And I think a lot of us settled on Stephon Diggs because he is Stephon Diggs. But Nico Collins is showing, and I think this is the case, that he is probably their best wide receiver. Because, and CJ Stroud has pointed this out, there are no weaknesses in his game. And then he's got the big play ability to just straight up take over a game. And he's active in the run game, willing to put his body out there and block. Strong, big and strong dude. And then you look at this game, 8 catches on 10 targets for 135 yards, and their only offensive, their only touchdown of the game. Their only touchdown of the game. So essentially carries them from a receiving standpoint. Targeted 10 times. The next most targeted guy was Stephon Diggs with 6 targets, and not nearly the production, obviously, with that amount. And then, as we talked about before, the run game was essentially not there. For the most part, was just straight up not there. So, yeah, man, this Nico Collins thing is 100% a thing. Like, I know he's popular in football circles right now, but I think that by the end of this season, this is going to be like a bona fide established connection that people talk about, like, some of the best quarterback wide receiver duos, the way they talk about Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, for it, just as an example. Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce as an example. I understand they have not won multiple Super Bowls or nothing like that, but just as an example, okay? This is it. This is a lethal connection. Some other Texan shout-outs that I want to get to before I get out of here. Henry Toa led them in tackling and was just flying all over the damn place. I thought he played, I know Lopez, I heard him mention this on In the Loop earlier today, the game of his life. I think that's probably fair to say. Like, I've never seen him look so explosive. And, man, whatever he did in the offseason to get his body right, definitely is paying dividends so far. Like, that's somebody that you definitely feel good about if they got to be on the field. Since I'm doing this, actually, Texan shout-outs, Azeez Al-Shaair, I don't know, as I record this right now, if there's anything coming down from the league or like what the deal is with the, with the punch on the sideline. But if he ever has to miss time, if he ever has to miss time either for injury or suspension, Henry Tortora is a natural Mike linebacker. So in theory, could step over and fill the role for Azeez Al-Shaair in a pinch, and I think you feel better about that after watching him over the first couple of weeks so far. So that's a pretty cool development, especially given the fact that we see Azeez, um, kind of gets busy on the sideline sometimes if it calls for it. Now, on that moment, he punched Roschon Johnson, Port Arthur's own, Port Nature's Grove's own, and University of Texas' own Roschon Johnson on the sideline after what the Bears sideline clearly viewed as a late hit on Caleb Williams as Caleb was scrambling trying to get out of bounds, and Azeez did light his ass up. I can't lie, he lit his ass up for real. Bears teammates, of course, took exception to it. Who knows what they said and what they were doing, as just straight up Bears orange jerseys are surrounding him. Who knows what's going on? He pops up, and his instinct apparently is to pop Roschon Johnson in the face, a straight up punch. And I'm like, yo, that feels a little excessive. And I'm not going to defend that, but I will say that I can understand the feeling if you are behind enemy lines. Who knows what they're saying to you, what they could be doing, what kind of threats, or just like out of pocket things they could be saying, and you feel like, hey, to get out of here, to ensure my way out of here, I might have to swing my way out. I can understand that, even if for us looking at it, that did not necessarily seem to be the case. Did not seem like Roschon Johnson. I don't know what he said or what could have been said amongst the group. But that did seem excessive. If the league decides to come down, or if we ever see something with Azeez Al-Shaair possibly towing the line a little bit too much, I feel better about Henry Tortora having to step in there. But granted, that's going to happen after Christian Harris comes back, which, yeah. I don't feel too good about that. I'm too optimistic about that. So, yeah, the Azeez and Henry Tortora is going to probably be now that I think about it, it's probably going to be the linebacker duo for a while. Missing Christian Harris, dynamic player, but don't feel great. Obviously, injured reserve. Don't feel great about his return being like soon. Yeah. But anyway, this is supposed to be Texan shoutouts. I'm not supposed to be bringing down the mood here as we end the show. I mentioned Henry Tortora. Obviously, we talked about Nico Collins earlier. The ends, the defensive ends, Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter got in on a sack together. Looks like they also both got sacked separately, and they were just monsters in this game. Now the Bears offensive line is not very good, as we talked about, so they should be able to exploit that matchup, but they absolutely did that, and they are part of the reason why I feel like Texans fans got to feel really, really good about this defense. Having that combo, got to feel great about it. And then, of course, the cornerbacks both getting interceptions. Derek Stingley Jr. and Kamari Lassiter. Lassiter really had his hands on two. One of them got called back, but he actually ended up getting another. That's important. That's important for the Texans defense. Is just as important as it is that Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson be the dynamic duo on the edge. You were expecting, I think, a lot out of Derek Stingley Jr. and Kamari Lassiter. And again, while they have given up some plays, they clearly are out there to make some. So those are the special Texan shout outs. That is it for the Reaction Monday version of the B Block podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure that you rate. Make sure you review. Make sure you tell people about the B Block podcast. We will be back later on in the week breaking down what CJ Stroud has to say. And we talked to CJ. I talked to Dalton Schultz, talked to Nico Collins in the locker room after the game. And, it is good to get the raw emotion from the players after the game, but they won the game and are going to be critical of some things. It'll be interesting to see how these guys talk later on in the week about how they played, especially, I would say even in a victory. So we'll do some of that later on in the week. In the meantime, again, make sure you are subscribed, rating, reviewing, telling people about the podcast. And I would say until next time, y'all be good.